Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today we'll be talking about bipolar pain. Many of you might not know about it, but so many people around the world, here in the UK, suffer from bipolar pain, where they 1 minute they're happy and they have a wonderful mood swing, the next minute they're absolutely low and they do not want to get out of bed. My guest today will be talking about her own journey with bipolar pain, and more importantly, how can you find your joy around being diagnosed from this? Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about my guest. My guest is Loren Eley, a media professional from New Zealand. She was living and working in London when she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a lifelong mental health condition characterized by mood swings from manic highs to depressive low. Her diagnosis came from an acute manic episodes where she was manic about the way she was working so hard, which was primarily brought about by working so intensively at work. She's discovered and learned a strong work-life balance and taught herself to work better. As Loren recovered, she learned the strong ways of dealing with it after having to suffer from the condition and not understanding, not liking how this made her feel. Through each episode, she learned a whole raft of tools for recovery to maintain and help her to become stable in dealing with the bipolar disorder. Maintaining stability is a job in itself, as it requires constant monitoring and attention, self-awareness, self-care, but she taught herself through various practices. And Laura hopes to help others to learn these tools and so they could better themselves and live in a joyful way with a disorder. I'm truly honored that she's taken the time out of her busy schedule to speak to us today, all the way from New Zealand. She'll be talking to us about bipolar pain, how to live with it, and then how to find your joy along the way. With my amazing guest, who was once an ambassador for Bipolar UK, as she shares her story. Meet my guest, Loren. Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today we'll be talking about bipolar pain. A lot of you will be asking that question, what is bipolar? Why? How do we know we are actually a victim of suffering from it? And can we find our joy? Well, Loren Eley will be telling us about her own journey, how she discovered this bipolar pain, and what she did to actually find her joy again. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Anne?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, I'm absolutely delighted that you've joined us today because, we're having such I would say, a unique conversation on this pain topic we always go through. And this is a topic on bipolar pain. A lot of people have heard about bipolar. I know for myself, I've heard about it, is that mood swing where one moment you're extremely happy, you're doing everything everyone wants you to do, you're happy to do it. Another moment, your mood swing is absolutely at its lowest point and you don't even want to get out of bed. But anyway, before we get started into that, Loren, can you just tell us a little bit about who are you?
Who am I?
Yes.
I'm a New Zealander, I'm a Kiwi. I have spent 15 years in the UK, living and working there in London, and I'm obsessed with board games, and I also have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Wow. So you said you're based out in New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about New Zealand for those of us based out here in United Kingdom who probably never ventured out there, probably thinking it's too far to get through? Can you just tell us a little bit about it? What is it like living in New Zealand?
It's really, really lovely. I'm really glad to be home. I feel like New Zealand is a slice of heaven. Its natural beauty is stunning. It's roughly the same size as the UK, but it has significantly less population. I think we have about 5 million people living in New Zealand, compared to sort of 68 million in the UK, I think.
Yeah.
So it's much more sparse and more scenic. Well, actually, it's not more scenic. the UK was very beautiful, but it's a beautiful place to live, and the people are very friendly, very down to earth, kind of salt of the earth, kind of is kind of what Kiwis are known for. So yeah, New Zealand's a great place to live.
Oh, amazing. And I love that, such a almost the size of the United Kingdom, and that there are not as many people living in the population in the country. So that actually makes it quite exciting in the sense that you have more land area, you have more to do. Obviously not meeting too many people, but at least you have more to do with it, with the land space you have available to yourself. When you look at your background as a child growing up, what was it like? What would you say that your background growing up in New Zealand was like?
I feel like I had a really great childhood. I was very loved and supported. We had a great family unit and extended family living across the world. I know that there's a lot of talk around people with mental illness having like a really troubled childhood, or it all stems from, back when you were little, but I don't feel like mine is that way. I feel like I had a really great childhood. So other than being exceptionally bullied in primary school and then again in secondary school, but I don't necessarily feel that that sort of is the reason for my illness, if that makes sense. So yeah, I feel like I had a really great childhood, mostly running around barefoot, a lot of climbing on trees, and just sort of going on hikes with the family and doing kind of a lot of outdoor activities. But yeah, so I feel like I had a great childhood.
When did you realize you had bipolar, and what is it?
I'm probably one of the lucky ones. So bipolar is often takes 9 to 10 years for a correct diagnosis, and that's an average. So there will be people that have had it for a lot longer, and then there will be people like me that had it a lot shorter before it was diagnosed. And I think the reason that it takes so long for diagnosis is that only certain symptoms are picked up at certain times. So people are often misdiagnosed with depression, for example, and then they might get put onto antidepressants, which then spike a manic episode, and then it could potentially be seen that actually it is bipolar disorder. For me, I was 29, in a new job in the UK, working really hard, burning the candle at both ends, and I had a very severe acute manic episode. So I very much had mania, and it was so extreme that I needed to be taken to the A&E, and the psych team were there to be like on hand to potentially put me into a ward at the time, but my partner wanted to look after me at home. But it was so severe that it was seen immediately and looked after immediately. So I was diagnosed pretty much as soon as it became a severe episode. But it's not until we look back at the build of hypomania into mania and realize that potentially it had been building for months. It's quite difficult to sort of spot when you don't expect it, or it's not even on your radar. So I think I was one of the lucky ones in being diagnosed so early.
Well, that's really lucky. So when you think about it, when you look at your teens years, can you think of anything that you look back and say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was because I was bipolar that led me to this episode? Can you think of anything like that?
I did have a bit of a blip in my teen years, and looking back at it, I've overanalyzed it for the last 10 years to kind of see, like, was it not? It was never sort of diagnosed. It was, I was off school for only a few days, but it was like very tearful, and I felt very low, and they sort of the GP gave me a bit of asked me a few questions, and I scored really, really low. And he said, oh, well, this was actually from a postnatal depression, questionnaire we give to new mums. And if you had just had a baby, we'd have been diagnosing you with postnatal depression. But before it, maybe there was a bit of this high intensity that kind of led to it, but it was such a small blip that I don't know that it would really count. So I'm not sure, but aside from that, I felt like I had quite a normal teen upbringing, I guess, with the kind of typical hormonal mood swings rather than a bipolar mood swing potentially.
And when did they diagnose it bipolar? Like, so for someone who's listening right now who wants to know, am I going through this symptoms? Can you describe when did they now describe and diagnose you, saying this is actually what you do have? You have bipolar.
So for me, it was the mania. I'd not slept for a few days. I had very intense work, client meetings, and doing a lot of extra hours. I was working in the office until 11 p.m. I was doing 8 hours on a weekend. I was, it was a very, very intense period. And then I was also trying to I deserve to go out and have fun. So I'd go to a friend's birthday party and be out drinking until midnight or whatever, when I actually just needed to go home and rest and sleep. So it was very intense. But what kind of manifested from that is I went to a work meeting. I scribed the 3-hour meeting. I then was talking very, very fast, and apparently I spoke to a colleague that afternoon and they didn't understand a word I said because I was speaking at such pace. I have had a lot of thoughts going around in my head. It was very, I had a lot of now I've looked back and realized were sort of delusions, kind of coming into sort of psychosis, believing that certain things were going to happen, like my door was going to be knocked down with a camera crew and they were going to take me to perform on stage with Dizzy Rascal. And then when my partner was putting me into a taxi to take me to the A&E, I thought we were going to the airport to greet my mum, who was coming over from New Zealand. None of these made sense. So it was pretty extreme and pretty scary. And I think that's the very upper end of mania, where it's, I believed I had the code. I was writing all night in a book to answer, so that I had to retrace my steps. But then when you look back at the book, it's gibberish lines and scrawls and kind of repeated phrases, which comes across as quite intimidating, I guess, and quite scary. But yeah, it was a moment in time that they managed to capture it and get me medicated and bring me down and get me to sleep. And then after that, they were able to diagnose once they knew a little bit more about what caused the buildup. I'm pretty lucky that I haven't really experienced depression. I've had a couple of what I call blips, but they were spotted and kind of recognized, I've been crying every day for 2 weeks without any reason, and it doesn't really make sense and I don't feel great. So then I'd seek help. This was post-diagnosis, and be able to kind of adjust medication and kind of feel better and come out of it. So I feel like I'm one of the smaller percentage of people that only experience the mania.
Oh, wow. No, this is really fascinating, that the way you describe it, because I think a lot of people go through that workaholic phase, or that phase where you're just working, then you go out, you're trying to do all your obligations, not giving time to yourself to rest and to really think about your mindset, your mental well-being. When you were finally diagnosed with bipolar, was that a bit of a shock to you? Did you actually know what bipolar was, or at all, or was it a shock to you?
It was a shock. I wasn't that familiar with it, but I did have some family history of mental illness. So my grandfather on one side had schizophrenia and took his life before I was born. And my other grandfather did have what was then called manic depression, which is now called bipolar disorder. But again, he suffered mania only. It was a very extreme episode when he was diagnosed. And he had to be sort of medically discharged from the RAF, but he lived very well just taking medication. He only ever sort of had symptoms when he sort of came off medication because he thought he was doing okay, but then realized he actually needed to continue. So it was never really thought of beforehand, but then it was kind of like, oh, maybe I captured a bit of both genes. And yeah, I didn't really understand bipolar disorder. So having being educated on it was really good. And I read a couple of books that were very helpful in terms of understanding what can lead up to an episode, trying to help identify your triggers, your stress points, warning signs, and symptoms. So it's really good. And I really, really valued Bipolar UK's website. In particular, they have the mood scale, which gives you kind of, you're in the green zone if you're between sort of 4 and 6, and up to 10 for mania, and down to 0 with depression. And it's good, like they've got little indicators on each side to say what kind of symptoms might be, or what kind of attributes might be happening at each stage, so that you can kind of understand where you are on the scale and whether or not you need to seek help.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, when your family, because I'm presuming your whole family needed to be here to support you, what kind of support did you receive from the hospitals, your family, your work colleagues? Do they give you support, or do people just tend to neglect you and say, you know what, deal with this on your own, this is yours, this is your diagnostic, this is your own problem, deal with it? What kind of support? And other people who might be going through, what advice would you give them in terms of seeking that help and support from others?
So seeking help is really vital, especially when you were as high as I was with mania. It needed medical intervention. There was no other way to bring that down, and that was terrifying. Like, that whole experience was really scary. And I know that some people with bipolar, and there are different types. So there are some that don't suffer the full blown mania. They might suffer more with the depression and then go into sort of hypermania, which is like a little bit more than people normally have, kind of happy highs. And I know that some people enjoy that because it feels very productive, but for me, it's terrifying, and I would need to do everything I can to not get there again. I was seen really quickly. I was admitted straight into a crisis team, and then a home treatment team would come daily to help me. I was living in the UK, so I didn't have my immediate family. My parents were still in New Zealand, but we spoke a lot, and I had some UK family, kind of extended family that I would see. My partner, my now fiance, was very incredibly supportive, and actually through that, he then changed careers years later to be a carer, because he realized that that was something that he was good at, which is great. I had a really supportive friendship circle, and also work were very incredibly supportive, particularly my boss when I was diagnosed at the time. He was an incredible support. And I think it took a little while for me, just while I was readjusting into the workplace. But I never felt that there was anything bad about what had happened. It was just that something had happened. It was very extreme. My mind broke, I guess. I felt like I had a bit of a breakdown, which obviously it was. And then it was just getting better. And very quickly I was talking about it and communicating about it, and people were listening and not judging, and sort of being surprised that I did have something, a mental illness. It kind of was almost like, oh, really? Wouldn't have expected that. So I think that was quite helpful, because it meant that I never really felt stigmatized. And I'm really passionate about making sure that it's part of a conversation within an organization, because that first episode was work triggered. So I really want to make sure that, people are very supportive to other colleagues that might be going through a difficult time, whether they're diagnosed or not.
No, that's really important. One thing about bipolar is an invisible disease and illness. It's not something that is written on the forehead or it's written anywhere. There's a disfigurement in the body that shows that you have this thing. So it takes a lot for someone to look at someone who looks absolutely well, because I look at you and I'm like, people will look and say, well, what's wrong with her? Are you sure? Because I have a chronic illness and I go through this all the time with my sickle cell. People look at me and think, are you sure you have anything? With bipolar, how do you echo and reach out to people to get more support for others who might be doing this? Because I see you're a big advocate for it. You talk about this openly. You're not silent about it. But how are you making sure the general public are more sympathetic to illnesses like this?
So I've done a number of things, both in the workplace and in my sort of personal life, to try and advocate for that and break down those stigmas. When I was employed in the UK, I was nominated to be part of their diversity and inclusion forum when that first started, about in 2018, so quite a number of years ago. I was on their disability. I was one of their disability champions, because bipolar disorder in the UK is a disability. And we did a lot of, I was part of panels discussing disability in the media, even talking about the disability representation in media. And that was on a panel to a number of MPs in the UK. So we've done a lot of talks around it and trying to make sure that people are aware of it. And then I've also done some education pieces, both with my organisation, a couple of others, and also I've helped Bipolar UK in my time as a media and an employment ambassador. And that included, the employment piece was really interesting, because there were different types that they could do, but they went into one organisation and there was maybe like a small room. We were there for 3 hours doing quite a lot of education. And then at the end, it's an opportunity for me to sort of share my experiences and what that looks like, and then just answer any questions they have. So we did that with a small group, but then we also did it to a room of about 100 people, and it was a much quicker sort of workshop. It was more like an hour, but the questions that people asked, I was very happy to answer any questions that came up. So I think it was a really good experience to help kind of educate people. And I think that organization deals with a lot of people who might have gotten into trouble financially and therefore need support through that organization. And it was good for them to understand, particularly with bipolar disorder and the mania, you can go into a bit of a spending spree and just feel like you're, and nothing can touch you, everything's a brilliant idea, and therefore you need to invest in whatever it is that you're buying or whatever. So a lot of people do go into debt when they have manic episodes. So it was really good to be able to do that education piece. And then personally, now that I'm back in New Zealand, I've got my own Instagram that I use as a sort of awareness piece, and just posting content as and when. It's not something I'm doing as a full-time job or anything like that. It's just kind of on the side of what I'm doing as well, just to kind of, and there's been a really great community on social media of people with bipolar disorder, and there's a lot of us that kind of all follow each other and share each other's content. So yeah, it's really cool. That's something I'm really enjoying.
So what are some of the triggers that sets the bipolar to really manifest in someone?
Sleep is my biggest, it's my biggest trigger, warning sign, and symptom. So lack of sleep is huge, and that's my number one focus alongside medication in order to maintain wellness. But triggers, stress, major life events, and the surprising thing there is that they can be positive events as well. So people having a baby or getting married or getting a job promotion or something can also trigger an episode, because it's such a big change, and it's exciting that it can potentially spike either a manic or depressive episode. So people don't quite realize that. And yeah, I guess triggers will be dependent on the person. I remember going to a course about bipolar disorder, and the person that had lived experience that was co-presenting that course, hers was whenever someone that she knows well dies, she ends up having a manic episode. So it can be like big things in life, but it can also be a culmination of really small things, that you're not looking after yourself, that you run down, that you're working too hard, or under immense pressure, and things just build up. It can be accumulation of small things as well. And
can you share some of the tools people could utilize to find their joy? So even though this can happen, and that this there's certain things that could trigger it, what can you do to find your way of living? Because life will always present happiness, it will always present depression, it will always present all sorts of things, because this is the real world. What can we do to eliminate it, so we could keep our level, our happiness, or something constant, so we don't have those trigger points?
For me, it's all around the self-care toolkit. So it's what things that you arm yourself with that you can deploy as and when you need it. So there are some things that I would do on an absolutely regular basis. I always get a minimum of a certain amount of sleep, and I make sure that my routine is centered around that sleep. So even if I'm going away, or I'm on holiday, or if it's the weekend, I try and maintain like a very similar sleep routine. Medication is key for me, but it's not always right for everyone, and there are a number of different medications, so obviously it's best to speak to your professional around what works for you. And then it's all the other things that I can deploy, which I know work for me. So for example, I will only deploy mindfulness when I really, really need it. So if I'm struggling to get to sleep, then I'll pull out like a sleep story on a Calm app, or a meditation, or guided meditation, or something to be able to help me get into a relaxed state to help sleep. I also have some aromatherapy oils that I rub on my wrists and breathe in before I go to sleep. That often helps me feel more relaxed and calm. So that's all around sleep, obviously. But then it's just the things that everyone talks about, that everyone hates doing. It's the it's trying to be mindful of your food, and making sure that you're fueling your body with the right things. And I'm not very good at that, but it is important. It's exercise, because we all know that exercise helps release endorphins and helps regulate your system, and it's so good for you. So for me, walking was really my big thing, which I'm not currently doing very well, but I usually get into a good routine with my walking. I try and do a walk a day when I'm doing it well. And then I think the other thing that I learned, I went to in the UK, they had most NHSs would have a recovery college in their system, and if you were under services with mental health, you could go to them, and they would have a medical professional, so maybe a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or something, and then a lived experience person, and they would do courses on either topics or illnesses or strategies and techniques on getting and maintaining wellness. A lot of them were CBT based, which is a popular form of talking therapy, and it's kind of quite a sort of structured thing that you kind of work through. So CBT was really good. Talking therapy, if I really need it, I'll speak to a therapist and kind of get through a period of time that's needed. But the recovery college gave me a lot of other skills like anxiety management, different techniques to be able to overcome very intense situations. And so I've kind of got this armory of things that I've learned over time, and it's when I'm well, I don't feel like I need them, but every now and then I'm constantly like, do I need that? How am I feeling? Should I be concerned? I think the challenge with bipolar disorder, particularly if you are struggling with mania, is that you can't always see it coming. And some of the symptoms are similar to my personality, like being energetic and being super productive and getting through a lot of stuff, and, feeling like I'm on top of the world and communicating with a lot of people and having a lot of big thoughts. So it's quite difficult to go, is this just me, or is this my illness? And do I need to be mindful of it? So I often talk with my partner and say, oh, this has been going on, and do we think we need to do something? Or, so it's good to have that support as well, sort of checking in on a regular basis to kind of say, what do I need to deploy? And then it might be like, okay, well, actually, there's a lot going on. Why don't you add a couple of things into your daily routine to make sure that you're looking after yourself as best as possible?
Oh, Loren, that's really helpful, because I love that fact that you have to check in and make sure, because sometimes you could lose it. You're just so consistent with yourself that you don't realize actually you're going past that mark, and you better start slowing things down. But someone else could look at you and say, I think you should slow down. I've noticed there's a little bit of erraticness with the behavior. You need to now get more rest and get more sleep. As a UK, when you're living in UK, you're an ambassador for the Bipolar UK. What are some of the lessons you learned from being an ambassador, and how did that help others who were going through similar issues?
Yeah, so I talked about the employment ambassador piece before, which was really, really, really fulfilling, because I could see people kind of the realization and the understanding of, oh, okay, I never really knew what this illness was. I get it now. The media piece was really fun, being able to post a lot of stories and blogs about things that my experiences, and having a lot of comments and likes and shares and stuff felt really nice, that people were kind of resonating with it. I also I went to one of the Bipolar UK's conferences that they had in person pre-COVID. And that was really interesting, because they would split off and have lots of different kind of rooms that you could go to that were themed around certain aspects. So you might have women in bipolar relating to pregnancy, because that's a really big issue, where people with bipolar disorder are more likely to suffer with postpartum psychosis after birth. So that was a really interesting space to go to. They would have employment ambassador and employment help. So kind of some guidelines on how you can live well and work well in a work environment, and what support Bipolar UK can offer for your workplace, to help them do sort of workplace assessments and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was really great being part of this community, and they've got like an online community forum where people can post and talk about what they're going through, and kind of get that kind of peer support. They had a lot of peer support groups. I attended a few when I was in London, and that's quite nice, because it's just a space for a couple of hours that people can go and kind of chat about what they're going through or have been through, and kind of have their own time, as well as supporting other people going through episodes, etc., which is really great. So yeah, Bipolar UK was a fantastic organisation to be part of.
Before I let you go, I have to ask you a question. I look at you, you look fairly well. You've managed to find your joy. You're living with bipolar. You've shared lots of positive story. Do you think that anyone could be fully cured of bipolar, or do you think it's an illness that is here to stay? You just have to learn to manage it and live with it and find your joy along the way?
Unfortunately, it is the latter. It is a lifelong illness. When I had my first episode, I didn't really believe that it could be lifelong, and I really struggled with the label of forever. I didn't have an issue with the label of bipolar, but I did have an issue with the fact that it was a forever thing. And I had 7 years of stability afterwards before my next episode. And that one was really debilitating. And that episode certainly taught me it can happen again, even if you're on medication, even if you think you're well, it can happen. So I think for me, it's just a case of enjoying being stable when I'm stable, making sure that I'm doing everything I can to prevent a future episode, or make it smaller or less impactful on my life if I do have another episode. So it is here to stay, but also I don't feel like it's reducing or it's not limiting my life in the way that people may perceive that a mental illness would. So I've definitely found a great way of living and managing and enjoying life without having constant episodes myself. So yeah, it is definitely possible to find joy.
And how can anyone find any information? Someone who's listening to you might want to say, I need to know more. I need to really speak to somebody about this, but I think I'm going through that symptoms where I don't know what I have, or I don't know if I have bipolar. If they want to reach out to you, how can anyone find you?
Yeah, sure. So I've got an Instagram page, which is live.life.loren, spelled Loren. And yeah, happy to chat to anyone there if they would like to.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate your time. I know it's very early for you out there in New Zealand, but I really appreciate you taking the time up to your busy schedule to share the vital information about bipolar, living with it, how to find your joy, how to get diagnosis, which is so many things that we hear so much about it, but a lot of people, the first instant is it's just this illness that where you're high at one point and you're down at one point. But from what you've described, it's more than that. It can be challenging. It affects your work, it affects your relationship, it affects your interaction with people. So it's all about how you manage those situations to find your joy and integrate very well with people and still get lots of rest. No, I really appreciate it. Any final words from yourself before we let you go?
No, just look after yourself and keep adding to your self-care toolkit.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, Lauren. Thanks for this.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you.